Joining us this morning, and this is a crash course for trading the underlying of index futures using binary options. Now, before we get started, I do want everyone to read over the risk disclaimer. This is for your protection as well as ours. And basically, even binary options have risk, okay? And you should never trade with money that you cannot afford to lose. Now, just a little bit about me. I've been trading for well over 15 years now, and I started out with a company that actually programmed indicators and just simply fell in love with the price bars. I specialize in price action, volume analysis, and divergence because I believe they are leading indicators. I'm also a frequent contributor for Stocks and Commodities, Traders World, and Top Shelf Magazine. I've also been a speaker at Traders World Online Expo, Traders Expo, and the Wyckoff Volume Conference. I'm also the author of Trading Nadex Binary Options, Keeping It Simple Strategies, as well as the New Trader's Guide to Trading Nadex Binary Options and Spreads. Now, today's agenda is to explore the differences between the E-mini futures, learn the market reports that affect the indices, discover why the quarterly earnings matter, and understand average and maximum moves in the E-minis. Now, the first thing that you need to know is the correlation between the underlying and the binary options. And I have listed the U.S. indices that are available on Nadex. And basically you have the Wall Street 30, which uses the E-mini Dow Jones as the underlying. If you were using a different charting platform, the symbol would be at YM. For the S&P 500, the symbol is at ES, and the binary option is listed as the US 500. On the E-mini NASDAQ, the symbol is at NQ. For the actual index, and the binary option is the US Tech 100. For the Russell, the symbol is at RTY for the E-mini, and the US Small Cap 2000 for the binary option. Now, the differences between the E-minis are that each E-mini index future is comprised of different stocks, and each stock has a different weight within the index. The largest movement typically is the U.S. session 930 to 4. Now that does depend because Nadex does offer some European indices, and they also offer some Asian indices. So this is really predominantly for the U.S. index. Now, you also have different increments with the E-minis. For example, the Dow Jones moves in full points. The ES and NASDAQ moves in quarter increments, and 4 ticks equals a point. The Russell moves in 10-cent increments, and there's 10 ticks to a point. Now, this is your strike width and availability chart. On the YM, for the 20-minute, it is a 4 to 6 point strike width. For the 2-hour, it's a 12-point strike width. For the daily, it's 20, and for the weekly, it is 100. Now, you do need to remember that the 20-minute binaries begin at 9:40 a.m. So if you open up Nadex and you're trying to find a 20-minute binary at 9:30, you won't see them. They do not begin until 9:40 a.m. The 2-hour binaries begin at 8 a.m. and the daily at 3 a.m. Now, this applies to all of the U.S. indices. The ES, the 20-minute binary, the strike width is between a 1/2 point to 3/4 of a point. It is dependent on what time of day that you're looking to trade that 20-minute binary. The 2-hour, the strike width is 1.5 points. The daily is 3 points and the weekly is 12 points. On the NASDAQ, you have a 1 to 2 point strike width for the 20-minute binaries, a 4-point strike width for the 2-hour and the daily, and then a 12-point weekly strike width. On the Russell, you have anywhere from a 0.5 to a 0.7 strike width on the 20-minute binaries, and then 1.4 strike width on the 2-hour, a 2-point strike width for the daily, a 6-point strike width for the weekly. The FTSE and the DAX do not have 20-minute binaries. The lowest you can go on these two, which are European indices, would be 15 points and 20 points, and that is on the 2-hour binary. Both indices have a 20-point strike width on the daily and a 50-point strike width on the weekly. They also open at 3 a.m. Now, the Japan 225 has a 20-point strike width on the 20-minute, 40 on both the 2-hour and the daily, and then a 100-point strike width on the weekly. Now, the China 50 is only offered on the daily basis and on a weekly binary option. The daily is a 20-point strike width. The weekly is a 100-point strike width. That market is only open from 9 o'clock p.m. to 3:55 a.m. Now, when can you trade the indices? It depends on which indices you want to trade. For example, if you want to trade during the Asian session, then you would choose the Japan 225 or the China 50. Now remember, the China 50 does not open until 9 p.m. Now London opens at 3 a.m. and you could trade the European indices. For example, the FTSE 100 or the Germany 30. Then when the U.S. opens at 9:30, you have the opportunity to trade the Wall Street 30, the U.S. Tech 100, the U.S. 500, and the U.S. Small Cap 2000. Now, market reports will affect the indices. The European market reports that will affect the European indices are the ECB president speaking, the Euro minimum bid rate, the ECB press conference, the Eurogroup meetings, and the German IFO business climate. For Asia, the market reports that you want to look out for are the Bank of Japan governor speaking, Bank of Japan outlook report, Bank of Japan policy rate, Japan monetary policy statement, Bank of Japan press conference, and the preliminary GDP quarterly report. Now, one thing you need to know when they do this Bank of Japan policy rate, they do not give you a specific time. They just give you a roundabout time that will come out. They don't really give you the exact time. On the U.S. indices, things that will affect the indices are non-farm employment change. First Friday of every month, that is the biggest mover. Then you have the core retail sales. You have the FOMC rate and statement. Now that will also has a huge impact on the indices. You have the Fed chair speaking, the CB consumer confidence, core durable goods, CPI and core CPI, the ISM manufacturing PMI, the PPI, the preliminary U of M sentiment, and unemployment claims. And I must admit the unemployment claims have not affected the market as much as they have in the past. We may see that change in the future. Now, the Eminis and quarterly earnings. For example, the S&P 500, these are the top 10 companies that are in that index. It's Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, Google, Johnson & Johnson, Berkshire Hathaway, JP Morgan, Exxon, and Bank of America. The ones on the Dow Jones, the 10 top companies are Apple, Boeing, Goldman Sachs, 3M, Caterpillar, Johnson & Johnson, Chevron, JP Morgan again, Walt Disney, and Visa. Then on the NASDAQ, you have Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, which is also Google, Comcast, Facebook, Broadcom, Vertex, and Netflix. Now, why does it matter? In the stock, when you have quarterly earnings, the stock will normally gap up. But on the indices can move overnight, okay? And this is what happened when Apple released their earnings. They expected it to be 1.57. It actually came in 1.67, and it came in at the close. So you can see that over here on the left, it gapped up on the stock. But look at what the NASDAQ did. You can see this is a 5-minute chart, and this was about 4:35 was when this bar plotted. So you had this massive move on Apple that was from the quarterly earnings. Now that could happen also in the morning if they release the earnings. Some of them release them around 7:30, some of them 8, some of them 8:30, and you'll get these huge spikes, okay? So you have to be aware that quarterly earnings can affect your binary position. Now, the biggest questions that most new traders have is, number one, how much does the binary move, okay? In other words, how much does the underlying move? Then, if you choose to use an out-of-the-money binary, for example, on the Wall Street 30 at 2 in the afternoon, how far out of the money can you go, okay? Or if you decide to use an at the money or a deep in the money, you know, how much volatility is there going to be at noon on the E-mini Dow if you're trading the Wall Street 30? Well, this is a minimum move for the Dow Jones, and this is based on the rates of 2016. So let's take, for example, at 1300, which is 1 p.m., and that encompasses the move from 12:01 to 1 o'clock p.m. And you can see that in January, it moves 32 points. And let me highlight this. So you have 32 points in January, but we're currently in August and it's only 9 points. So what does that tell me? Well, first you have a 12-point strike width on a 2-hour binary. I could easily go out of the money in January. However, I would not want to do that in August, okay? Why not? Because in August, it does not even move 1 strike. Does everybody understand that? Now, why am I using the minimum? Because it's the worst case scenario, okay? My worst case scenario is I'm going to lose money. Do I really want to do that? Because I'm not even going to move a full strike width, okay? I'm probably not going to do out of the money from 12 to 1 p.m., okay? Instead, in that case, I would just use the at the money or in the money, okay? Because you don't have a lot of volatility there either. All right, but what's your average move? Excuse me. The average move would be 83 points in January versus 36 points in August. So in this case, if I did an at the money, then more than likely I might be able, if I could determine the correct direction, I may be able to actually make money using an at the money, okay? What is my best case scenario? Well, my best case scenario would be the maximum move, and the maximum move would be 165 points in January versus 78 points in August. Okay? And I have these on all of the U.S. indices with the exception of the Russell. I have not done the Russell yet. But for example, here's the NASDAQ, the minimum move. And again, just using the 12 to 1 p.m. time frame, okay? You can see in January, it moves 8 points versus August, which moves 5 3/4 of a point. Again, telling me I probably don't want to do an out of the money in August, but I may want to do them, for example, in February. This would be the minimum move, okay? Now, what would be, average move? The average move on the NASDAQ, looking at the same period, would be 27 points in January versus 11 points in August. And again, this goes back to your strike width and knowing your strike width. Would you want to do out of the money in August, or would you want to do it in January? To me, I would prefer to do it in January. I have more of a chance of actually making a profit, okay? Then what is your maximum move? And this would be, you just hit the gold mine on this one. It moved, the maximum would be 52 in January versus 25 in August. Okay. And again, this is just giving you a way to actually plan for worst case, average, and absolute best case. This is what it's going to move. On the ES, now typically the ES does move less than any of the other indices, in case you didn't know that. So we're going to look at the same thing. We have 4 points in January versus 1.5 points in August. Again, what does that tell me? That tells me all of these are out for trading out of the money binaries, okay? I would not even do it in November and December. I would limit my out of the money binaries probably to January and February, maybe March, okay? This is when I would do the out of the monies on the ES, okay? Then we can go and see, okay, what is the average movement, okay? And again, the ES does not move as much as the others, okay? So you're going to get 10 points in January versus 4 points in August. Remember, this is the average move. But again, I would probably limit most of my out of the monies to January, February, and March, because you can see this is when it moves the most. Now, let's see what the best case scenario is, and that's when we have just a dream day where it moves really a lot of volatility. You get 20 points in January versus 10 points in August. Again, typically your best months would be January to March for using the out of the money binaries. These are going to move 4 to 5 strikes in your favor, which makes me want to trade the out of the money. Okay? Any questions on that so far? Now, you can visit my website at tradershelpdesk.com, or you can email me at gm@tradershelpdesk.com. Any questions about the presentation today, guys? Oh, well, thank you, Keith. Okay, if there's no questions, then I'll go ahead and end the presentation. I do hope everyone has a wonderful day, And of course, if you do have any questions, just send me an email and I'll be happy to respond.